And I am going to use a shape here. Come into the library, get a shape, and we will set it to bell. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up to 2K. Now, this isn't really the shape I want. What I want is a ring. And I'm going to do that by using a gradient map. And it's, because I can assign whatever I want to anywhere in this gradient, but I can still keep it black and white. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to get another black, and we'll kind of flip it. And I'll get a ring that's, not too sharp and kind of even coming in and coming out, that I think is going to give me a nice bump in the water that's going to be, the right consistency. I can also set this gradient map, by the way, to be a grayscale, so you don't have to, you can actually use it as grayscale, but it's very convenient for doing stuff like this. Now, the way we're going to build these ripples is we're going to need to use a wave, because we have to get them to go bigger, but we can't have them keep getting bigger. They have to come back again. So they're going to go out and come back. But we don't really want to watch them come back, at least not too much. So we also are going to have to manipulate the opacity in order to get this to not see it so much when it comes back. I think this is a little thick. I'm going to go back and make this a little thinner. So we're going to get an effects map. Now, we're going to repeat this. I'm going to use a series of 4, and then we're going to combine them, and then those guys we will then randomize the way that they're spread out. Now, let me reset my effects map to grayscale, and we're going to right-click and edit effects map. So we're going to put all our function, I don't know what you call it, function area. We do want to set this to input image. But the other thing we're going to be affecting is the pattern size. Now, the pattern size is a float 2. So even though we're putting it on the color luminosity, we're going to have to create a float 2 value. So I'm going to make an empty function. We're going to get into our empty function. And we know we're going to need a $time. And we're going to be dealing with a series of randomizations here. And the way we're going to get these things to do different, each individual ring, we're going to have 4 rings interplaying with each other, and they're all going to be doing it random. So that's always kind of like a very touchy-feely thing. The key, though, we should probably do this now before we forget, is I want to set it up so that of each of these, we're just going to copy this one out once we've made it, but we're going to change on each one of them the random seed and whether or not it inherits its random. And in this case, we're going to want no, because we want them working completely independently of each other. And this way, we could keep using the same function here, and the random numbers are really going to be super random. So the first thing I want to deal with is how quickly each one of these individual rings moves. And this is a number I came up with, but obviously if you want your numbers to be different, you can make them different. But what I'm doing here is taking a random number between 0 and 1.5 and adding it to 1.5. So at minimum, this is going to be 1 point, whatever the smallest random number it's going to give me, and at the largest, it's going to be 3. And I'm going to multiply this by my time. So this is going to determine the speed at which each ripple moves. So each one of them is going to move at a slightly different speed. Now, I mentioned that we're going to want this to be on a wave because we have to have it go out and then come back in again, because if you do this just on a straight tangent, it's just going to go, it's going to just fly off and you'll never see it again. So we're going to get a sine function here. And now we have to, so we know how fast this wave is moving because we've we've got the time here. But now we want to tell it how big it's going to be. So I'm going to get another constant, and I'll set this to 1, because I don't want it to be too big. And we'll get another multiplication. But by the same token, I also want it to stay in the positive, so I'm going to add a 1 to it as well. And this is the size. So it's going to get bigger and it's going to get smaller according to this sine wave. But we need it to be a float too. And since we want it to be even in the way that it sizes up and down, this is going to be exactly the same number for both the x and the y. And now we actually have to assign it to the size. So we're going to set this variable. And I'm going to hand type in ripple size, and I'm going to copy that. And before we move away from here, we need to set up our control sequence, because this float 2 is not going to work for this node, and we have to actually give it the information that it needs. So for now, I'm going to put in a constant 1 here. We are actually going to change that in a minute. And then I'll set this as my output node. Let's come back out to our effects map and come into our pattern size now. We're going to create an empty function. And I'm going to add a variable. Oops, I need to float 2. And here I have to paste in my ripple size. It's not going to appear on this drop. I mean, it does now because I put it in, but it won't appear. Set variables will not appear on this drop-down list like input parameters will, which is why I copy it, because this way I always have the exact right name. And then I'll set this as my output node. So I'm going to come back into my color luminosity. And you know what? Why don't we export this out now and see what this looks like? We can save it as drop effects, and we'll put it out into where I was picking up my... Oh, we forgot to put an output. So it doesn't work. Yeah, you do actually need to put outputs on these things. I'm going to right-click, add a node, output. And for now, we'll call it, well, I'm going to call it mask, because ultimately that's what it's going to be. But I'm going to assign base color to it, because otherwise it's not going to see it. It's not going to, if I leave it as mask, it's not going to read in a way that we can see it. And I just want to watch what it does right now. But ultimately, I'm going to have that as a black and white mask, and then we might as well make the second one, which we're going to have as a normal. And it's the normal that we're going to be using in the material that we're making. Oh, how did that happen? Well, we'll just switch it. Okay. So let's save it out. And we can go into our substance player. Okay, there's a couple of things we're forgetting. First of all, the size is too big. Second of all, I forgot to set it as for it not to tile. So I'm going into my effects map, tiling mode. I'm going to set to absolute, and then I'll have no tiling. And it's getting very big. So let's bring this down to 1. Because it's having too much time to go out. So this way it'll be, there's no way this number is getting bigger than 2. And that should do it. So we'll export it out again. And I'm going to refresh. Still too big. But it has slowed down. Yeah, I think I like this. I like this slower timing better, but it's still getting too big. So this we have to bring down here. So again, because we're adding a number to it, let's try 0.5. It'll probably be too small. Because I kind of want it to come out to the edges, but not overlap them. Let's try a little bit bigger. Yeah, that's right. I like that. Okay. So the next thing we need to deal with is to have we kind of want to block out as much as we can of the, this back, going back to the smaller size. And for that, I'm going to get a cosine because it's essentially the same wave, it's just staggered. And we can use this one here. We're going to do the same thing. Actually, why don't we just copy this? We're going to do the same thing to this cosine that we did to the sine. Yeah, okay. Wasn't sure if it would do it if I did it backwards, if it would accept the answer. And then we're going to replace this one here. And fingers crossed this will work because, yeah, just because I had it work for me the last time doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for me this time because it's got random numbers in it. They make me crazy. So let's see what happens. So now it should theoretically turn on and off for us. Yeah, that's about as good as I ever got it. But when you're laying these on top of each other and you've got these bright white ones, when you've got these little artifacting things, you don't notice it, and it kind of works because ripples do come back on each other. They just shouldn't be the ones that are like the strongest. So it looks okay. Right, so step 2 now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this guy and we're going to make 3 more copies. And then each one of them, we have to go and edit the effects map, click on the effects map, and come in here and make sure that, okay, so the last one was 0. We're going to make this a different number, and it's not inheriting the random. I'm going to come in this one, right-click, and do the same thing down the line. And we'll get a couple of blend notes. And we'll use lighten blend here. And let's see how it looks so far. Yeah. So you're really only noticing them mostly when they're coming out as opposed to going back in. Yeah, so far so good. The other thing that I did to kind of give it even more sort of fullness as far as its sort of ripply abilities, and you don't have to quite deal with so many random crazy things going on, because it's kind of a drag to get these things to behave. I made a smaller version of this one, and then I blended it again. So again, with the lighten blend, and just make this one ever so much smaller. Oops. I'm hitting Alt and Shift at the same time, so it does it towards the center. So just kind of doing a smaller version of it. And let's take a look again. Yeah. So, again, you can play with this and get them to go exactly how you want, but this is the basic idea. You're just laying these things on top of each other. All right. So this is each individual droplet now done. And now we're just going to run it through another effects map where we're going to randomize its position. So we'll grab another one here, and we can plug that input in. Let's turn it into a grayscale. And I'm going to right-click and edit effects map. Now, on this one, we do want to expand on what's going on here, because now we're going to start randomizing the sizes and the positions. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to hit my space bar and hit quadrant, and that will automatically put all 4 noodles into that second quadrant. But now I'm going to start splitting things up. I'm going to right-click, add a quadrant here, and I don't suppose it really matters. I had done it actually like this, and like this. But, it really doesn't matter. What I'm doing here, though, is I am going to step down the sizes. So we'll leave this one alone. And now I'm going to add a quadrant here. And I'm going to highlight this one, spacebar, quadrant, spacebar, quadrant. So we have, this will be the biggest one, smaller, smallest, because each time it's going through those quadrants. But as far as what happens at the end, we're actually going to get rid of these two guys. What happens in this last quadrant is going to be essentially the same thing. So we're just going to work on the one, and then we're going to copy it out to the other ones. So I've highlighted that quadrant. I'm going to come up into the color luminosity, and we'll create an empty function. Now here, instead of the size, we're going to be dealing with the position. But regardless, we're going to need to do a sequence. And for now, again, as a temporary measure, I'm going to put in a constant float 1 for our opacity. But we are going to mess around with that later too. But this one is simple because we're not really animating it. Well, we'll be animating the opacity. We're not animating the size. We're not animating the offset, rather. I'm going to get a 1 here, and then I'm going to get a random node, and I'm going to duplicate that because I do not want my x and y number to be the same, but they can both be a number between 0 and 1. And now I'm going to vector them into a float 2. And this is going to be my position offset. So I need to get a set variable, and I will hand type in position offset, and I'm going to copy that for later. And I'll plug it into my sequence node and set that as my output. I'm going to come back out into my quadrant, get into my pattern offset, empty function, get my float2 variable, and paste in that name that I made and set that as my output node. And now I can come back into my color luminosity and start working on the actual color luminosity. So this is just saying where the position is. We made those rings that, go out and in, out and in. I don't want them to just kind of sit there and do that. I want them to flicker on and off, otherwise it's going to look stupid. So we can still use this one, but we're just going to put some randomization in here, and again, we're going to get a wave, except this time, for the sake of simplicity, I just got a wave here. You can actually get this. This is a cool node. It's essentially the same thing that we built the last time, except you can change the amplitude and the frequency, and I like using this a lot. I'll get a couple more nodes here. We're going to need an addition node, and we're going to need a random. So we're going to need 2 of each. Okay. So we're going to get, because we want 2 separate numbers here, that's why. We're going to get a random number between 0 and 1, and then we're going to add that number to 1. So what this says is this number will always be a number somewhere between 1 and 2. It'll never be smaller than 1, and it'll never be bigger than 2. And I'm going to plug these 2 things into my amplitude and my frequency. Now the amplitude says, how high it goes, and the frequency says how close those waves are together. And this is going to determine how things, if it's going to be white or black. And it's just going to kind of alternate in between these on a random thing. And that should do us. So let's come back in here and see what happens. Oh, it's not, well, I guess we're not going to really see anything. Do that. Might as well put them all in. Okay. I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to get rid of this one. I'm going to get rid of this one. And I'm going to paste both of these guys out. Oh, I forgot to put pattern in. Okay. They're going to both take input image. I just realized no, I know what, okay, I remember what I did. All right, I'm fine. We need to create 2 more input images. I have this one. I'm going to use this one, and then I'm also going to use this one. It's three variants on the same thing, but it's an efficient way of doing it, and they look different enough that it works. So now I will have a drop-down menu here that will allow me to put in the input image I want. So I'm just going to go down the line, and I'll put a different one in each of these. So each one of these now is a slightly different size, and it's a slightly different animation. And let's see what happens. There we go. So I mean, you can tweak it how you want it. I mean, I think those are probably a little big, but I'm not going to get too neurotic about it. That's the basic way that that's put together. Now I want to do a couple more things here. In the actual, you know, when I'm highlighting the actual node, there's something here called global opacity. We can't really see it right now because of the way the wave is turned on, that it's black right now. Notice here how they're not pure white. So if we were using this as a mask, it's not really going to work all that well. But I'm going to set the global opacity to 2, and let's republish it out, and you'll see what a difference it makes. So it's the same image, but it's bolder. So you can tweak that global opacity to get this to work like you want as a mask. And then the last thing I want to make here is a normal mask. So I'm going to come into the library. I'm going to get a height to normal. It's low. It's not 16. Again, it's kind of hard to do right now. Well, let's see whether we can't plug this in for just a second and imagine what my ripple is going to look like. Let's try that. Oh, I can't. Well, yeah, it is going to be normal. Okay. That's pretty good. So the last thing I want to do on here, on this effects map, is to put in an iterate node, and I'm going to set that as my root. And this will allow me to increase or decrease the number of, like the density of those raindrops. So, I mean, we don't want to go too crazy, but I think I'm going to set it from like 1 to 3. But I'm going to make an input parameter first. And we'll call this drop density. And I'm copying it without the underscore. It's going to do that automatically, and I don't have to change anything in here. But I do have to turn this into an integer. I'm going to make my default 1. I'm going to make my minimum 1. And I'm going to make my maximum 3. I mean, you can clamp it if you want. I'm going to leave it alone. And then we can come back into our effects map, and I'm going to set drop density for my iterations. And we can publish it back out again. And so I have my drop density here. And I can increase the number of iterations. And that takes care of that. Okay, so let's get back to our ripples. Nope, wrong one. I'm at Puddles. And we have this placeholder here. And all we need to do is we need to take our drop effects, which is the one, this is the one I made as a test. And we're going to plonk it in here. And then we have the normal, and we'll just replace that. So we get back up into Puddles, and we can publish that out. And we can open up Puddles, and there we are. I mean, it's showing at 512. You have to. I haven't figured out a way of getting that output size to work properly. I mean, for it to like stay as a default. Yeah, I think we can make that animation better. This player renderer tends to work very slowly for me. It'll work better in Unity, but we can get. Let's come back in here and set this down pt.2, it could be down really low. And let's see whether that helps. Now let's take a look at it in Unity. So I'm going to publish it out to a different folder. And we can take our Puddles material and put it on here. Come into our inspector and ramp this up. Our animation is set. The lighting looks pretty crappy, but I don't really have it set up at all. And let's see what happens when we play it. I thought it was set. It was not. Yeah, they're too big though. I mean, the animation clearly works better here. Let's make them smaller. So we can, the quickest and dirtiest way of doing that is just dropping a transform 2D node in here and making it smaller. Yeah. I'll kick those ripples up a notch, see if they can't animate it okay at a slightly higher resolution. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it makes a difference if I do it here or here, but I don't think it does. I'm going to restart it. Sometimes it, again, I'm not very good with video cards. There's the short answer. I don't have patience with that. No, I'm going to leave it at the lower res. It's better. And I think what I am going to do, though, is I'm going to make this relative to parent, and then this one I'll bring relative to input. Okay, I think that's pretty much done. Let's just put this final version back out again. Obviously, I think the rocks could use more work as far as the color goes. But this was much more about, I mean, if you know, I got plenty of tutorials on how to make nice rocks. Now that I'm looking, I really can't stand it. Let's just get more variety in here. This will take 2 seconds. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get a nice picture from the internet, and we can use that. Okay, so I just took a break and just went online, and I kind of like the colors on this one. Yeah, so I'll use this smaller version, and I first have to find my gradient map. I'm going to get into my gradient editor. I hopefully now have both of these on. Oh, I don't think this, I'm not sure. It's not going to work. We're going to have to split this screen. Right, let's try that again. Okay, I'm going to get my pick gradient, and I'm going to let this do my work for me. No. Let's try it again. Better. In fact, I think it's good enough. I like the variation in it. I just think it's a little bit too light. So very often I will just go ahead and put a hue, saturation, lightness node in here because it's just so much easier to deal with than trying to adjust your gradient map if you're doing like tweaky things like this. Let's go a little bit darker, and I think that's much better. So we'll publish this out one last time to see what it looks like in Unity, and I think we're going to call it a tutorial. Okay, let's turn it on again. Yeah, got our little raindrops. We got the ground. I mean, you know, the textures could probably use more work, but I think it's done enough. And you know, the key thing here was the raindrops and you know how to do these masks. So I think we've learned all of that, and I think we're going to call it a day. So I hope it's been useful, and I'll see you next time. Actually, a quick addendum. I realized after I finished the video that I forgot to take this drop density and expose it. So if you want to be able to, in-game, change the density of the drops in addition to the puddle size, then you have to do this. So we're good. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's going to look exactly the same as we published out. It's just you're going to be able to get more drops. So, yeah, sorry about that. Have a good one.